Hey there, night owls and curious souls. Before we dive into the flickering firelight of the past, take just a moment. If you're enjoying these sleepy strolls through forgotten history, go ahead and tap that like button, share this with someone who needs a nap, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got another tale tomorrow, just as strange, just as dreamy, and I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Is it raining outside? Are you curled up under a weighted blanket or just hiding from your inbox? Let me know. I read every single one, usually while drinking medieval strength tea. Now, close your eyes, or at least pretend to, because tonight we're going back to a time before alarms, before apps, before anyone even asked how many hours of REM you got. We're stepping into the life of Matilda, a peasant girl in 1351 who doesn't know what sleep hygiene means, but could probably teach it. Her mattress, straw, her blanket smelled like last winter's fire. Her sleep better than yours. Why? Because she's exhausted. Because she's been hauling piss pots since dawn and kneading rye dough so thick it could fight back. And because when the fire dims and the wind whispers through the cracks in the wall, she doesn't scroll. She surrenders. To silence. To sleep. To the rhythm of a life where you only rest when there's nothing left to give. So tonight, we lie beside her. Not literally, don't worry, there's no room, but close enough to feel the warmth of shared breath and straw, and maybe, just maybe, you'll forget what time it is too. Matilda's body isn't just tired, it's waging a quiet rebellion. Her arms ache like she's been wrestling ghosts. Her legs buzz with that sharp, satisfied kind of pain, the kind you only get when you've carried buckets uphill in boots that technically don't qualify as shoes. Her back is screaming like it's been personally betrayed by gravity, and somehow in the middle of all that discomfort, there's a rhythm, a drum beat that starts in her ribs and echoes through her bones. The rhythm of survival, the rhythm of the peasant life. There's no gym membership, no CrossFit class, no standing desk with an ergonomic chair. Her day begins with the rooster, assuming he didn't get eaten last week, and ends only when the sky gives up on sunlight. She doesn't sit down unless the bread needs kneading or someone's cow is in labor. Rest is something that finds her by force, not by invitation. She doesn't get ready for bed. She collapses into it, a pile of bruises and unfinished prayers. And this isn't just some romanticized medieval misery porn. This is daily life. This is how people like Matilda live, without hashtags, without health trackers, without complaining to an Instagram story at 2 a.m. She doesn't know about blue light or melatonin. What she knows is that the moment she finishes scraping the soot from the hearth, the moment she lays her head on a pillow that smells faintly of goat, her eyes start to close without her permission. There are no distractions, no buzzing notifications, no last-minute emails or late-night doom scrolling. Just the slow crackle of a dying fire and the murmur of 8 other people snoring in various tones and timbres around her. Her younger brother Ronulf breathes like a squeaky bellows. Godric, her not-quite husband, sleeps in his tunic with one hand always twitching, like he's still dreaming of plowing the field. And the air? It's thick with the scent of smoke, sour wool, and something slightly fermented, but none of it matters. Because in this house, comfort is not the goal, warmth is. Safety is. The kind of safety that comes from proximity, not privacy. The kind that says, if something comes for us in the night, at least we'll hear it breathe first. Matilda shifts slightly, feeling the sting of straw pressing into her skin through the linen. There's no thread count to brag about. No orthopedic memory foam, just hay, layered over rushes, maybe with a few scraps of moss stuffed in the corners if her mother had time. The bed is more concept than structure, and yet it works. She feels her limbs settle into it like it's made of clouds and not compost ingredients. This is not the kind of fatigue modern people understand. This is not, I'm tired because I've been on Zoom for 6 hours. This is, I'm tired because I chased a runaway chicken for 45 minutes and then dug a latrine pit in soil that might actually be made of medieval sadness. It's the kind of exhaustion that makes your brain shut off before your thoughts can finish forming. It's sleep not as luxury, but as a bodily demand, like hunger, like breath. And as the fire gives its final sigh, shadows flicker against the walls. The cottage settles into a hush, broken only by the occasional cough or the squeal of mice in the rafters. This is when the first sleep begins. Scientists centuries later will marvel at it, call it biphasic sleep. They'll write papers about it, try to replicate it in expensive labs. But Matilda doesn't know that. She just knows she sleeps, wakes up a little, maybe chats with Elga about the stars, maybe relights the fire, maybe just sits in the dark feeling the peace of being irrelevant for a moment. This, right here, is where the modern world falters. We've built a culture on stimulation, on always being on fearing silence because it means we might have to face ourselves. But Matilda, she thrives in that silence. It holds her like a lullaby sung in a language older than words, a rhythm passed down not through science but through repetition, through centuries of lived experience, through the instinct that says, when the world gets dark, it's time to rest. She doesn't have a bedtime. She has a boundary, the line where the body says, enough, and she listens. Not out of discipline, but because there's no other choice. There's no Netflix to override the fatigue, no podcast playing in the background, just exhaustion, raw and unapologetic. And here's the twist. Her sleep is better than yours. Yes, yours. The one with the cooling mattress and the blackout curtains and the playlist of whale sounds, because Matilda's sleep is earned. Every minute of it soaked in sweat and soot. It doesn't need optimizing, it just is. When you think of the past, maybe you imagine suffering, and sure, there's plenty of that, but there's also simplicity, a brutal kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly what your body needs and giving it nothing more. You work, you eat, you rest, and when you rest, you disappear, not metaphorically, but fully. No dreams, no plotting the next day, just blackness, just breath. As Matilda drifts, the rhythms continue. The fire collapses into ash. Ranulf mumbles in his sleep. Godric lets out a snore that startles the dog. And Matilda? She's gone. Not dead, just sleeping so deeply that even her worries forgot where she lives. You, on the other hand, are still here, listening, wondering what that kind of sleep feels like, wishing, maybe, that you could trade in your smartwatch for a pile of straw and a fire that tells you when it's time to surrender. Wishing you could earn your rest, not schedule it. So maybe tonight, after this, you'll turn off the lights. Maybe you'll set down your phone. Maybe you'll breathe deeply and imagine the feel of rough linen against your cheek, the smell of burnt wood, the sound of someone snoring nearby. Not annoying, just comforting. Proof that you're not alone, that there's nothing left to do, that rest is waiting. And maybe, just maybe, you'll drift into first sleep too. Matilda is not alone in her sleep, and not just metaphorically. She's quite literally entangled in a mess of limbs, shared breath, and mutual survival. Her sister Elga's elbow is somewhere dangerously close to her ribs. Ranulf is snoring directly into her hair. Godric's foot, for reasons known only to his unconscious mind, keeps migrating to her side like it's on some barefoot pilgrimage. And somehow, none of this is weird. It's normal. It's necessary. It's medieval sleep in its truest form, communal, chaotic, and weirdly comforting. You don't get your own room. You don't even get your own pillow. The concept of personal space hasn't been invented yet. Instead, you sleep like spoons in a drawer, tight, misaligned, and occasionally poking each other in unfortunate places. But this isn't just about saving space. This is about surviving the cold, sharing warmth, and warding off the kind of silence that swallows people whole. In the modern world, silence is marketed as a luxury. Back here, it's a little too close to death. The hearth is at the center, always burning, always faintly crackling, even when the flames are shy. It's the heart of the house, the core around which everyone rotates, and every night, as the fire dims, everyone drifts toward it, not just for heat, but for reassurance. To be near the thing that means life. The flame is hope, and everyone's huddled around it like moths with nowhere else to fly. Matilda lies still, not wanting to wake the sleeping pile of humanity draped around her. She listens to the sounds of shared rest, soft snores, the occasional grunt, the rhythmic puff of someone's breath, escaping under a wool blanket that smells suspiciously like pickled cabbage. These aren't annoyances. They're proof of life, of presence, of community in the most bodily, practical sense. You don't have secrets here. Not when your body is pressed against three others, not when someone else's foot is your pillow and your blanket smells like everyone you know. This closeness is primal. It breaks down the barriers that modern life builds up so aggressively. You can't lie about who you are when your lice are mingling with your neighbors. And yes, there are lice. Of course, there are lice. It's the 14th century, and everyone is basically a walking, scratching ecosystem. You just get used to it, like background noise, like the smell of unwashed hair and boiled turnips. In the warmth of this proximity, though, there's an odd kind of peace, a rhythm. Not just the rhythm of sleep, but the rhythm of bodies syncing up, hearts beating in near unison, chests rising and falling like they're all reading from the same ancient lullaby. Matilda can feel it. She doesn't understand it, not consciously, but her body knows. It leans into it, surrenders to it. Modern people chase this with white noise machines and weighted blankets. Matilda gets it from Ronulf's snoring and the collective body heat of 7 exhausted peasants. It's not clean, it's not quiet, but it works. It works better than your sleep playlist, your memory foam mattress, and your lavender essential oil diffuser. And yet, beneath all this cozy survival, there's also vulnerability. This closeness is protection, yes, but it's also exposure. If someone coughs, everyone hears it. If someone screams in their sleep, the entire room jolts awake. If the fire goes out, they all feel the cold. There is no insulation, not from weather, not from sickness, not from each other. Godric once had a cousin who died in his sleep. No one noticed until morning when his body didn't move with the rest of the rhythm. That night, they all slept a little farther apart, not because they were scared of death, but because it had taken one of the breaths from their circle. And the silence where his wheeze used to be was deafening. Matilda remembers that night, the way the fire crackled too loudly, the way no one spoke before second sleep, the way they all breathed in unison, as if trying to make up for the one breath that didn't return. That's what it means to sleep together. It means life is communal, but so is loss. And still they press in close. Because what's the alternative? Freezing in separate corners? Pretending you don't need anyone when the wind howls through the walls like a hungry ghost? No. You press in. You wrap arms and legs around each other like vines clinging to the only tree left standing. Matilda turns onto her side, trying not to disturb Elga, whose dreams tend to involve kicking. She stares at the ceiling, if you can call it that. A thatched roof low enough to touch, dripping slightly from the melted frost. Somewhere in the straw, a mouse skitters. It doesn't scare her. It lives here too. The roof groans softly in the wind, a sound she's heard every night of her life. And instead of fear, she feels anchored. Like the world outside may be brutal, but in here, for now, there's safety. Because even if the walls are thin, even if the straw smells weird, even if her bed is more biologically diverse than the Amazon, she's not alone. And in a strange, deeply human way, that's enough. So the next time you feel annoyed by your roommate's snoring, or wish your partner would stop stealing the covers, remember Matilda. Remember this pile of tangled limbs and half-dreaming peasants. Remember that there was once a time when sleep wasn't a solo mission, but a group effort. When warmth came not from central heating, but from elbows and knees and the shared understanding that we survive better when we're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, that's still true. Even if your mattress doesn't creak with every shift, even if your house doesn't smell like wood smoke and cabbage, even if your only roommates are your cat and your guilt about not replying to emails, maybe what you're missing isn't silence or softness. Maybe it's the rhythm, the breathing, the bodies, the unspoken midnight agreement that says, we're in this together, even if it's just for the night. And with that thought, Matilda lets go and sinks into second sleep. Matilda never thinks twice about the state of her blanket. She doesn't complain about the fact that it smells like every meal cooked over an open fire for the last 5 winters. She doesn't wrinkle her nose at the stiff patches where soot met sheep oil and created a texture somewhere between armor and crusty pancake. She just pulls it up to her chin, presses her face into it, and exhales. Because out here, in this cold, in this life, softness isn't a requirement. It's a luxury. Warmth is what matters, and that blanket, battered as it is, still holds heat like it's protecting a secret. The truth is, it wasn't always this blanket. 5 years ago, it was her uncle's hunting cloak. Before that, part of it lined the family boots. The stitching you see along the edges, that's her mother's work, repaired after a wolf dragged it into the woods one particularly awful January. Every patch is a story, every stain a memory. This isn't bedding. This is heirloom survival gear. And the thing is, she's not alone in this sentiment. Elga has a similar bundle of fabric wrapped around her. Once a wedding shawl, now just something to keep the frostbite from nibbling toes. Ronulf has a threadbare tunic he uses as a blanket substitute, mostly because he keeps giving his actual blanket to the dog, claiming, "She's colder than me," which is nonsense but oddly sweet. Godric? He sleeps under what used to be a tapestry. No one knows where it came from, but the embroidery has long since faded into something vaguely resembling moss. This is what comfort looks like when you don't have options. Not store-bought, not aesthetic, just necessity with some personality. But it works, and it works better than you'd think, because when your bones ache and your fingers sting, you don't need a plush duvet. You need something that holds the heat in and the nightmares out. Matilda has learned to fall asleep to texture, to the roughness of wool against cheek, the scratch of linen at the neck, the occasional surprise of straw poking through like nature's little prank. It's all part of the routine. A bedtime story told in fibers. No one talks about it, but everyone understands it. And yet, despite the roughness, there's a kind of intimacy to it. She knows exactly which spot on the blanket is warmest. She's memorized the little rip by her shoulder where the cold sometimes creeps in. It's not perfect, but it's hers. It wraps around her like an agreement. You made it through today. Let me help you get through tonight. Outside, the wind howls, not metaphorically, really howls, like it's dragging its claws across the thatched roof. It sneaks through every crack, every seam in the wall, slipping past animal hides and bundled straw. But the fire is holding. Barely. And the bodies in this room are still enough, heavy with that exhausted kind of sleep that can't be faked. Inside this home, if you can call one room with a dirt floor a home, there's a kind of resilience, a stubborn warmth that exists not because the house keeps the cold out, but because everyone inside refuses to let it win. The heat from the hearth doesn't reach every corner, but that's okay, because bodies do, because blankets do, because the rhythm of shared breath creates something more powerful than insulation: connection. Modern folks would be horrified. No central heating, no radiator, no smart thermostat that whispers, "Good night, Alexa," just a fire pit that belches smoke and the hope that the embers last till morning. Unthinkable. But Matilda doesn't need convenience. She needs consistency. She needs this old soot-stained blanket. She needs Godric's arms slung over her like a misplaced scarf. She needs the sound of Elga mumbling in her sleep. These are her anchors. This is what keeps her from floating away into the dark. You might think she lies awake wishing for more. A cleaner bed, a mattress with actual springs, a blanket that doesn't weigh as much as a goat and smell like one too. But you'd be wrong. She doesn't lie awake at all. When she hits the rags and straw, she goes down like a sack of stones in a river. No hesitation, no overthinking, just surrender. And that's the secret. That's the thing no one wants to admit. All our modern comforts, they help, sure, but sometimes they complicate. The luxury of choice becomes the curse of insomnia. Too many pillows, too many thoughts. Matilda doesn't have that problem. Her choices are sleep or freeze, so she chooses sleep, every time. The floor beneath her is cold, despite the rushes. The straw is probably hiding things she'd rather not meet, but she's warm because of the fire, because of the bodies, because of that god-awful blanket that somehow still smells like victory. And here's where it gets wild. She'll wake up better rested than most people reading this. Her sleep is unbroken, undistracted. No late night scrolling, no 3 a.m. overthinking, no checking the time to calculate how much sleep she's losing by checking the time. Her brain shuts off. Her body takes over. She sleeps because her body has nothing left to give. And in that surrender, there's peace. So tonight, as you toss and turn under your perfectly folded comforter, maybe you'll remember Matilda. Maybe you'll picture her curled beneath a smelly, patched-up blanket, surrounded by family and firelight, breathing in sync with the only life she knows. And maybe, just maybe, you'll stop chasing softness and start chasing stillness. Maybe you'll let go of the idea that comfort equals calm and realize that sometimes peace is simply earned through exhaustion. Because when everything is stripped away, when the world outside howls and the fire burns low and the blanket clings to your shoulders like a second skin, what really matters isn't thread count. It's warmth. It's breath. It's not being alone. And just like that, Matilda slips into sleep. Not carefully, not gracefully, but deeply. like a stone into earth, like the night has finally decided she's earned it. Matilda never thinks twice about the state of her blanket. She doesn't complain about the fact that it smells like every meal cooked over an open fire for the last 5 winters. She doesn't wrinkle her nose at the stiff patches where soot met sheep oil and created a texture somewhere between armor and crusty pancake. She just pulls it up to her chin, presses her face into it, and exhales. Because out here, in this cold, in this life, softness isn't a requirement, it's a luxury. Warmth is what matters. And that blanket, battered as it is, still holds heat like it's protecting a secret. The truth is, it wasn't always this blanket. 5 years ago, it was her uncle's hunting cloak. Before that, part of it lined the family boots. The stitching you see along the edges, that's her mother's work, repaired after a wolf dragged it into the woods one particularly awful January. Every patch is a story, every stain, a memory. This isn't bedding. This is heirloom survival gear. And the thing is, she's not alone in this sentiment. Elga has a similar bundle of fabric wrapped around her, once a wedding shawl, now just something to keep the frostbite from nibbling toes. Ronolf has a threadbare tunic he uses as a blanket substitute, mostly because he keeps giving his actual blanket to the dog, claiming she's colder than me, which is nonsense but oddly sweet. Godric? He sleeps under what used to be a tapestry. No one knows where it came from, but the embroidery has long since faded into something vaguely resembling moss. This is what comfort looks like when you don't have options. Not store-bought, not aesthetic. Just necessity with some personality. But it works, and it works better than you'd think, because when your bones ache and your fingers sting, you don't need a plush duvet. You need something that holds the heat in and the nightmares out. Matilda has learned to fall asleep to texture, to the roughness of wool against cheek, the scratch of linen at the neck, the occasional surprise of straw poking through like nature's little prank. It's all part of the routine. A bedtime story told in fibers. No one talks about it, but everyone understands it. And yet, despite the roughness, there's a kind of intimacy to it. She knows exactly which spot on the blanket is warmest. She's memorized the little rip by her shoulder where the cold sometimes creeps in. It's not perfect, but it's hers. It wraps around her like an agreement. You made it through today. Let me help you get through tonight. Outside, the wind howls. Not metaphorically, really howls. Like it's dragging its claws across the thatched roof. It sneaks through every crack, every seam in the wall, slipping past animal hides and bundled straw. But the fire is holding. Barely. And the bodies in this room are still enough, heavy with that exhausted kind of sleep that can't be faked. Inside this home, if you can call one room with a dirt floor a home, there's a kind of resilience, a stubborn warmth that exists not because the house keeps the cold out, but because everyone inside refuses to let it win. The heat from the hearth doesn't reach every corner, but that's okay, because bodies do, because blankets do, because the rhythm of shared breath creates something more powerful than insulation, connection. Modern folks would be horrified. No central heating, no radiator, no smart thermostat that whispers, "Good night, Alexa," just a fire pit that belches smoke in the hope that the embers last till morning. Unthinkable. But Matilda doesn't need convenience. She needs consistency. She needs this old, soot-stained blanket. She needs Godric's arm slung over her like a misplaced scarf. She needs the sound of Elga mumbling in her sleep. These are her anchors. This is what keeps her from floating away into the dark. You might think she lies awake wishing for more. A cleaner bed, a mattress with actual springs, a blanket that doesn't weigh as much as a goat and smell like one too. But you'd be wrong. She doesn't lie awake at all. When she hits the rags and straw, she goes down like a sack of stones in a river. No hesitation, no overthinking, just surrender. And that's the secret. That's the thing no one wants to admit. All our modern comforts, they help, sure, but sometimes they complicate. The luxury of choice becomes the curse of insomnia. Too many pillows, too many thoughts. Matilda doesn't have that problem. Her choices are sleep or freeze, so she chooses sleep. Every time. The floor beneath her is cold, despite the rushes. The straw is probably hiding things she'd rather not meet, but she's warm because of the fire, because of the bodies, because of that god-awful blanket that somehow still smells like victory. And here's where it gets wild. She'll wake up better rested than most people reading this. Her sleep is unbroken, undistracted, no late night scrolling, no 3 a.m. overthinking, no checking the time to calculate how much sleep she's losing by checking the time. Her brain shuts off, her body takes over. She sleeps because her body has nothing left to give, and in that surrender, there's peace. So tonight, as you toss and turn under your perfectly folded comforter, maybe you'll remember Matilda. Maybe you'll picture her curled beneath a smelly, patched-up blanket, surrounded by family and firelight, breathing in sync with the only life she knows. And maybe, just maybe, you'll stop chasing softness and start chasing stillness. Maybe you'll let go of the idea that comfort equals calm and realize that sometimes peace is simply earned through exhaustion. Because when everything is stripped away, when the world outside howls and the fire burns low and the blanket clings to your shoulders like a second skin, what really matters isn't thread count, it's warmth, it's breath, it's not being alone. And just like that, Matilda slips into sleep. Not carefully, not gracefully, but deeply. Like a stone into earth. Like the night has finally decided she's earned it. Morning doesn't burst into the room. It seeps in slowly, like fog under a door. A faint gray light slips through the cracks in the wooden walls. It touches the dirt floor, crawls up the straw pile where Matilda sleeps, and gently nudges her awake. Not urgently, not aggressively, just insistently enough that her eyelids twitch. And when they open, there's no confusion. No blinking at a phone to check the time. No mental math to figure out how many hours she slept. There are no numbers, just the sky, faintly pink, and the cold air pressing its fingers into her collarbone. The fire is nothing but ash now. A few sad coals glow under the soot, but even they are fading. Matilda doesn't move right away. Her body isn't ready. Her joints feel like someone filled them with frozen mud. Her muscles protest like a choir of offended elders. But she doesn't groan, doesn't stretch dramatically, she just breathes. Slow, deep. Letting the reality of the cold day ahead settle into her bones before she dares to rise. Around her, the room stirs. Elga mumbles something in her sleep and pulls the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Ronulf kicks once, then stills. Godric rolls over and lets out a grunt that could mean anything from good morning to I'm dying. Their father snores, a long, ragged sound like a saw trying to cut through wet wood. It's not peaceful in a traditional sense, but it's theirs. And as her fingers curl under the edge of her blanket, Matilda feels it, the sudden sharp sting of cold. Her breath fogs the air. The warmth she built up during second sleep is already leaking out through every threadbare stitch and patched corner of the fabric. It's time. She sits up. Not quickly. There's no hurry. No clock telling her she's late. But there's a rhythm to this life, and it doesn't wait. The animals will need feeding. The water needs hauling. The bread needs kneading. The sun isn't all the way up yet, but neither is she, not really. Half of her still lies in the calm of that second sleep, the other half bracing for the weight of the day. She swings her legs over the edge of the straw pile. Her bare feet hit the dirt floor, which is somehow even colder than she expected. It bites through her calluses like ice water. She winces, but only slightly. The shock is familiar. It's the same every morning. The cold here isn't just a temperature, it's a fact of life. It doesn't care how tired you are or how long the night was. It greets you every morning with the same harsh reminder: this world was not built for comfort. The floor is more than just cold, it's alive. With history, with life, with smells. The dirt has absorbed years of meals, footsteps, spilled ale, birthing fluids, death. There's straw layered over it, sure, but it's more for tradition than insulation. If you dig through it, you'll find a timeline of survival in every layer. Bits of old rushes, broken pieces of wood, dried leaves that somehow slipped in before winter, and probably a flea or 10. Matilda stands. Her knees pop. Her spine cracks in 3 places. She's 26, but her body carries the age of someone who's lived 5 lifetimes through labor alone. She wraps her shawl over her shoulders, rough wool, scratchy, heavy but warmer than air, and walks to the door. It's a single wooden slab, swollen from damp and warped at the edges. She lifts the latch and pushes. It groans open, releasing a gust of icy air that makes her blink. Outside, the world is still. Frost clings to the ground like glass dust. The trees stand bare, black against the soft blue dawn. There are no cars, no sirens, no buzz of electricity, just birds, quiet ones, and the distant creak of a neighbor's cart wheel. She steps outside, breath visible. Nose instantly cold, and yet there's something beautiful in it, something honest. This is what the world looks like when no one's trying to edit it, filter it, or monetize it. Just earth, just cold, just another day. She walks to the water barrel first. The top is frozen over. She grabs the stick left leaning against the wall and cracks the ice with a practiced swing. The sound is sharp, satisfying. She scoops out a bucket's worth and carries it inside. Her fingers are numb, but she doesn't spill a drop. The morning unfolds like a slow, necessary ritual. She stokes the fire. She kneads the dough that her mother left rising near the coals. She checks on the root cellar, brushes snow off the herbs hanging from the rafters. Every movement is deliberate. There's no multitasking, no distractions, just task after task, stitched together with the quiet kind of focus that modern minds have forgotten how to hold. Eventually, the rest of the family wakes, groaning, coughing, moving slowly toward their morning routines. No one says much, not because they're unhappy, but because speech requires energy, and energy is earned, not wasted. Godric takes the axe and heads outside. Ronulf is still rubbing his eyes, already muttering about how unfair it is to feed the chickens before breakfast. Elga helps their mother with the morning fire. And Matilda? Matilda watches the bread rise. There's something deeply satisfying about it, the way the dough pushes upward, golden near the bottom, warm from the hearth. It's not perfection. It's sustenance. It's something that will fill their stomachs just enough to survive until dusk. She doesn't think about sleep again. Not until much later. Not until her hands are raw from washing clothes in freezing water. Not until she's chopped turnips until her palms blister and helped patch the roof with hay that keeps falling apart. Not until every muscle in her back screams for mercy. And even then, she doesn't dream about bedtime. She just counts the tasks until it returns. Because that's how life works here. You don't own your time. You rent it with sweat, with effort, with the knowledge that rest isn't scheduled. It's earned. And when it comes again, when the fire flickers low and the family returns to their heap of straw and wool and breath, Matilda won't lie awake wondering if she's done enough. She'll know. And that knowledge alone, that's worth waking up for. By the time the sun begins its slow descent behind the trees, Matilda's world is already winding down. Not because she wants it to. Not because she's decided the day should be over, but because her body tells her it must be. The sky glows a muddy orange, casting long shadows across the yard where the chickens have finally quieted down, full from scraps. The fire inside is burning hotter now. Elga's been feeding it all afternoon, more attentive than usual, because the frost is back tonight and last winter nearly froze the dogs stiff. Matilda wipes on her apron. The fabric is damp, stained, and probably hosting its own civilization by now, but it doesn't matter. It's hers. She stretches once slowly, bones cracking like twigs in spring. Her arms tremble slightly, not from fear, but from wear. The kind of fatigue that doesn't scream, it hums. Quiet, constant, unmistakable. The house smells like bread, not the fluffy, Instagram-worthy kind with crusts that crack perfectly in artisan ovens. No, this is dense, slightly burnt, slightly undercooked peasant bread. It's hearty, it's heavy, it's survival in loaf form. They'll eat it with whatever root vegetables manage not to rot in the cellar, maybe some leftover stew that's been reheated so many times it no longer remembers its original ingredients. And that'll be dinner. There's no ceremony. No dining table conversation about goals or gratitude. No wine to swirl or dessert to unwrap. Just quiet chewing, the occasional cough, and the clink of wooden bowls being passed across the dirt floor. And then slowly, like dominoes falling in reverse, the family starts to drift. Ronulf curls near the hearth. Godric leans back against the wall and lets out a groan that might be contentment or indigestion. Hard to say. Elga folds the blankets down. Their mother pulls her shawl tighter, mutters something about the saints, and closes her eyes. Matilda waits. Not because she's not tired, but because there's still a rhythm to follow, a pace. You don't just flop onto straw like it's a mattress. You ease into it. You find your place. You make peace with the aches and the cold and the fact that someone's foot will absolutely find your kidney in the middle of the night. She glances at the fire. Still alive. Still glowing. That's good. She finally lowers herself down, tucking her legs under the blanket, finding the patch that holds the most warmth from the night before. The wool scratches at her skin, familiar and slightly unforgiving. The straw shifts beneath her, adjusting with creaks and crackles like an old friend settling beside her. And then, stillness. Not silence. Never silence. The room is full of sound. The gentle puff of breath from sleeping mouths, the occasional pop from the fire, the wind testing the shutters, seeing if they've grown any weaker since morning. But it's a stillness of purpose, a stillness that says enough. Matilda doesn't think of tomorrow. There is no mental checklist being updated, no reminders buzzing in her mind. There is only now, this breath, this blanket, this moment. And as her eyes begin to close, she doesn't even realize what's happening. Her mind doesn't spiral, it doesn't resist, it lets go. First sleep arrives like it always does, without permission, without apology. It wraps around her like an old story she's heard 100 times but never tires of. The world fades, the aches vanish, even the cold seems to retreat, pushed back by the heat of bodies huddled close, by the weight of blankets worn thin through use but thick with memory. This is the kind of sleep that doesn't just rest the body, it erases it. That pulls you so deep, you forget your name. That lets you sink, not softly, but completely, as if the earth is holding you, saying, "I've got you now." She dreams in sensations, not stories. The smell of rye, the feel of the dog's fur, the echo of a hymn sung off-key. There's no logic, no plot, just flickers, just warmth. But here's the thing, they never stay down all night. They're not supposed to. And sometime later, hours, minutes, it's hard to tell, Matilda wakes, not abruptly, not fully, just slightly. The fire is low, the room is dim, the breath of the others has slowed, synced like a quiet drum. She doesn't move, just lies there, awake, not troubled, not anxious, just still. And this right here is the forgotten magic of second sleep. The intermission, the pause. Modern people think waking in the middle of the night is a problem, a sign of stress, an error in the algorithm of rest, but for Matilda, it's expected, it's welcomed. This is when she might whisper a prayer or press her hand to her chest just to feel the steady beat of her own heart. This is when thoughts are allowed to stretch. When the mind wanders, not in panic, but in peace. Maybe she remembers something, her uncle's old joke, the sound of rain on thatched roofs, the face of someone long gone. Maybe she just stares at the ceiling, wondering if the stars outside are still burning as bright. She doesn't light a candle. She doesn't poke the fire. She doesn't reach for distraction. She simply waits, and slowly, quietly, without command or calculation, second sleep returns. This time it's heavier. This time it drags her deeper, past the aches, past the frost, past the memory of lifting buckets and scraping pans. Her breathing slows. Her body folds into the straw as if it never left, as if it belongs there, not just tonight, but forever. And when the sun finally rises again, touching the sky with the same muddy orange it wore yesterday, Matilda will wake again, not with dread, not with resentment, but with the quiet strength of someone who survived the cold. Again. She will rise, she will ache, she will work, and she will sleep. Because here sleep isn't a luxury, it's a rhythm, a reward, a return. The room is thick with midnight again. Outside, the wind doesn't howl, it whispers now, as if even it knows it should keep quiet while the world sleeps. And inside, every creak of the walls, every sigh of the floorboards, sounds louder in the hush that blankets the one-room cottage like another layer of worn wool. Matilda stirs, not from a bad dream or a sudden noise, but from the subtle call of the night itself. Her eyes open slowly, adjusted to the dark before they even realize they're open. She lies still, listening, not afraid, just aware. This is normal, expected, part of the rhythm. Second sleep hasn't come yet. This is the in-between. In modern terms, it's called the watch. A segment of time, usually an hour or two, between the two halves of a peasant's rest. But no one back then used that name. They didn't call it anything. They just lived it. Matilda knows it like the back of her work-worn hand. That gentle return to wakefulness, that quiet space carved into the night where everything slows down even more. She shifts under her blanket, the sound barely a whisper, just enough to feel the chill of the air outside the wool cocoon. Her body doesn't feel rested yet. Not fully, but it doesn't need to be. That's what second sleep is for. She sits up. Not abruptly, she doesn't want to disturb Elga, curled just a breath away, or Ronulf, who somehow managed to rotate a full 90 degrees in his sleep and now has one foot in the firelight. Godric's arm twitches again, That same nervous tick that never quite goes away, even in his dreams. Matilda wraps the shawl tighter around her shoulders and stands, bare feet against the cold floor. The straw bites. The rushes don't help much, but her toes are used to it, just like they're used to calluses and splinters and stepping on forgotten turnips in the dark. She moves toward the fire. It's not out, but it's close. The embers glow like the last breath of something proud and old. She grabs the stick, pokes gently, feeds it a small piece of dried wood, not to start a blaze, just enough to keep it alive. Enough to let the coals remember who they are. The flame flickers once, then holds. In this hour, Matilda doesn't think about chores, not about bread or goats or mending skirts. This is the one moment of the day, if you can even call this night a day, when her mind is allowed to just be. She kneels near the fire, hands outstretched, palms open to the glow. Some nights she prays, not loudly, not in Latin, not with perfect words, but with thoughts, loose and unstructured, more like offerings than requests. She thinks about her sister's future husband, if one ever comes, and if he'll be kind. She thinks about the frost creeping into the barn and the baby calf that didn't make it last week. She thinks about what her mother looked like before the lines in her face settled in for good. Other nights, she just breathes, and that's enough. Sometimes, if Elga stirs too, they talk, quietly, like children under blankets sharing secrets in the dark. One time they talked about the stars. Another night, they made up a story about a goose that learned to speak and demanded better feed. Ridiculous, pointless stories, but somehow exactly what they needed. Tonight, though, everyone else sleeps. Matilda is alone, but not lonely. The silence doesn't feel heavy. It feels earned, intimate. The room feels like it's listening, too. She reaches for her cup, a wooden thing, cracked but solid, takes a small sip of water, cold, sharp, enough to remind her she's awake, and then, with no clear decision made, her body moves back to the bed, back to the warmth waiting in the shape of her own sleep-molded hollow. She slides under the blanket, this time slower, this time with the fire still glowing behind her. She doesn't try to sleep. She lets it come. Second sleep always arrives different than the first, not in a rush, not like a hammer, like that initial crash into unconsciousness. Second sleep is gentle, subtle. It creeps in through the soles of her feet, across her spine, behind her eyelids. It wraps around her like smoke, thicker, softer, quieter. And the dreams it brings, they're different too. More vivid, more coherent, sometimes strangely real. Matilda's heard people talk about seeing things in second sleep, visions, premonitions, lost loved ones. She's not sure she believes all that, but she does know that in this part of the night, her thoughts have color, texture. She's walked through forests that don't exist, held conversations with people who've been gone for years, laughed in her sleep so hard she woke herself up. Not tonight. Tonight, second sleep comes like an old friend who knows when to speak and when to simply sit beside you. No images, no sound, just presence. And that presence is enough. Outside, the frost thickens. The wind hums again, no longer a whisper, but a lullaby. The village sleeps, the world holds its breath, and Matilda disappears into sleep once more. No alarms, no plans, no need to fight it. Just trust. Because this is what rest is supposed to be. Not something you earn with coins or buy with prescriptions, but something you fall into because the world has gone quiet, and so have you. And when she wakes again, when the coals are dead and the sky is silver with pre-dawn light, she'll rise, she'll stretch, she'll groan, she'll carry water and worry and wood like she always does. But for now, she sleeps, and that is enough. When second sleep lets go, it does so gently, like fog rising from the fields just before dawn. There's no alarm, no shrill interruption, just the gradual return of sound and sensation. Matilda blinks her eyes open into a soft gray light. It's not morning yet, not really. But the darkness has lifted enough for her to make out the shape of the roof above her, the threads of straw poking through, the silent outline of Elga's sleeping body a few inches away. Second sleep is different, deeper, richer, and when it ends, there's no confusion, no grogginess. Her body knows this rhythm too well to resist it. She doesn't lie there wondering what time it is. She doesn't fight to squeeze in 5 more minutes. Her sleep hasn't been measured by hours, it's been measured by need, and her body has decided that need has been met. There's a weight in her limbs, not heaviness from exhaustion, but fullness. The kind of grounding that only comes from deep rest. a reminder that she is no longer running on empty. Her body has refueled in the oldest, most honest way there is. Around her, the house is still. Ronulf's breath is steady and loud, like a little engine that refuses to quit. Godric is somewhere under his makeshift blanket, a tangle of limbs and unfinished dreams. Their mother hasn't moved at all, her stillness a sign of peace, not illness. The fire has given up some time in the last few hours, leaving only gray dust and the faintest curl of smoke. Matilda doesn't move right away. She lets the warmth cling to her for just a little longer. The blanket, rough and scratchy, holds a pocket of heat she knows will vanish the second she lifts it. She takes one last breath inside that cocoon before sitting up. The cold greets her immediately, biting at her exposed skin like it's been waiting all night for this moment. She doesn't wince, she just sighs. It's not personal, it's just how mornings start here. The floor beneath her is as hard and uninviting as ever. The straw makes a soft crackle as she shifts her weight, swinging her legs around and planting her feet into the dirt with a quiet firmness. She stands, stretching slowly, her arms rising over her head, her back cracking like firewood splitting, and that's when it hits her, that she feels good. Not perfect, not pain-free, not ready to run a race, but solid. Like her bones are in the right place again, like her muscles have forgiven her for yesterday's labor, like her mind, often hazy, often clouded with things undone, is now strangely clear. This is what second sleep does. It doesn't just top off your energy, it resets something deeper. A calibration of self, hidden inside the rhythm of the body, far beneath language. Modern minds try to hack it, track it with devices, simulate it with supplements, but Matilda lives it without even knowing what to call it. She just knows. After that second sleep, the world feels a little more manageable. She steps toward the hearth. The coals are dead. She kneels, gathering kindling, muscle memory taking over. She knows which pieces burn hottest, which bits of straw catch quickest. She strikes the flint. Once, twice, a spark leaps, tiny, defiant, and catches. She blows softly. Flame, small but certain, like hope. The room warms in degrees slowly as the others begin to stir. Not all at once, a groan here, a cough there, Ronulf muttering something incoherent and mildly insulting. Elga rolling onto her back and opening one eye like she's debating whether to live another day. And as the fire grows, so does the light. The sky outside begins its shift toward morning, painting the walls of the cottage in pale blue and soft gold. The frost outside glows silver in the dawn, clinging to the grass like lace sewn by winter itself. There's no rush, no race to get dressed or check a calendar. The tasks will wait, but not for long. The animals need feeding, the hearth needs tending, there's bread to bake and clothes to scrub. But for now, in this brief in-between, there's calm. Matilda grabs the bucket and heads outside. Her breath puffs in front of her like smoke. The cold hits harder out here, sharper, but it doesn't bother her. Not after that sleep. Not after that reset. She moves like someone restored. Not like someone pampered, but like someone made whole by rest that asked for nothing except surrender. She cracks the ice on the water barrel. The sound echoes, crisp and clean. She dips the bucket, hauls it up, and feels the weight, not just of water, but of the new day pressing itself into her shoulders. And yet she doesn't feel crushed by it. She feels ready. That's the thing about second sleep. It doesn't just finish what first sleep started. It gives you back to yourself. It quiets the noise you didn't know was ringing in your bones. It clears the fog you didn't realize was hanging in your chest. It turns survival into resilience. And in a world where rest is not guaranteed, where the nights are cold and the work is endless, this kind of sleep is not a luxury. It's a rebellion. It's a refusal to be broken by the day before. It's a promise whispered by the body to itself. I can still heal. Matilda returns inside, her cheeks red from cold, her eyes sharp. The family is rising now, one by one, stepping back into life. They'll complain, they'll stretch, someone will burn the bread again. The same stories will get told and the same chores repeated, but none of that dulls the truth glowing under Matilda's skin. She slept, deeply, twice, and that means today she can begin again. Not because she wants to, because she can. The door groans open, spilling pale morning light into the cottage. The frost that once curled around the edges of the threshold now glints under the rising sun like broken glass scattered across the earth. Matilda steps out first, breath clouding in front of her, hands still raw from hauling water, but warm inside her shawl. The world is cold, but she is not. Not anymore. The fire behind her crackles to life, stoked and tended, ready to receive another day of struggle, warmth, and smoke. Inside, her family begins to move with the slow rhythm of people who know exactly what the day requires, because it's never different. It's always chickens, dough, laundry, hauling, chopping, praying for rain, but not too much. The routine doesn't change, only the body that rises to meet it. And this morning, Matilda meets it head on. Her second sleep has done something to her, not magical, not mythical, but practical, restorative in a way that aches can't argue with. Her mind is sharper, her steps steadier. Even the creak in her shoulder from carrying Elga's weight last week feels a little softer today. There is strength in this rhythm, in surrendering to it, in not resisting the body's way of knowing when to stop and when to start. She doesn't question how it works, she just follows it. As the sun rises higher, the frost starts to retreat from the roof thatch. It drips down in slow, silent droplets that land in the yard like tiny ghosts returning to the soil. The chickens shuffle around, pecking at the ground, muttering complaints in their own feathered language. Godric tosses them grain, still half asleep. His hair sticks up at strange angles. Ronulf tries to race the dog to the fence and nearly slips in a puddle that wasn't there yesterday. The village is waking now. Thin trails of smoke curl up from other chimneys in the distance. A few neighbors call to one another, quiet greetings, cautious jokes. Everything about it feels lived in, worn soft by repetition, like Matilda's blanket, like the dent in her straw bed. She grabs the wash basin and heads to the stream. Her boots squish in the thawing mud, but she moves quickly, familiar with every step. She doesn't notice the cold water biting her wrists as she scrubs linens, doesn't flinch when a wind gust cuts through the valley. Her body is already in motion, already committed. Because that's what rest is for. It's not just to stop, it's to begin again. Fully, completely. And the others? They feel it too. Elga, who barely spoke yesterday, now hums as she hangs herbs near the window. Their mother sits straighter, her face less pale. Even the dog, who limped through the snow last week, trots with something close to pride. It's subtle, but it's real. The way rest creates resilience. The way sleep doesn't just ease pain, it prepares you to carry it. Matilda finishes the washing and returns to the yard. The bread is rising near the hearth. The house smells like ash and wheat, familiar and grounding. She grabs her needlework and sits near the fire, threading the same stitch she's done since she was 6. Her fingers move without thought. Her mind, however, is not still. Because somewhere, buried beneath the calm of this morning, there's a question. A quiet one. Whispering. How long can this last? It's not fear, not exactly. It's awareness of seasons that change, of plagues that travel, of weather that turns brutal overnight. In this world, nothing is guaranteed. Not the crops, not the cow's milk, not tomorrow. And yet, here she is, sitting, breathing, sewing into the side of a dress that's more patched than original cloth. Here they all are, surviving. There's a knock at the door, more like a rap, really. A neighbor needing help with a stubborn pig, or perhaps news from the mill. Elga answers it, laughter in her voice before the door even opens. Matilda listens without looking up. The world continues, because that's what it does, even when it's hard, even when it's cold. And especially after a night like last night, when sleep came in waves and left her not with dreams, but with clarity. She looks at the fire, the coals glowing now, steady and bold, no longer fighting to survive, just existing, holding heat with the calm confidence of something that knows its purpose. Matilda breathes, not because the day is easy, but because she is ready. Because second sleep has handed her back her name, her steadiness, her hands. She's not refreshed. That word belongs in places with linen sheets and lavender oil. She's something better, restored. And as the sun stretches higher and the air warms by degrees, Matilda rises again, not because she's forced to, but because she can. And in this moment, that's everything. There's a certain kind of silence that comes in the late morning. Once the fire has been fed, the chores are underway, and the house is no longer bracing against the cold. It's not true silence, not really. There's always some background noise. A clatter of a bucket, the distant shout of a neighbor, the scrape of a pot being pushed across the hearth. But it's the kind of quiet that settles around a family when everyone knows what needs to be done, and no one has to say it. Matilda is outside, again. The sun is higher now, but the warmth it promises is still more theory than fact. The air has teeth, and they nibble at her cheeks, at her fingers, at the tips of her ears. But she doesn't flinch. She doesn't tighten her shawl. Instead, she leans into the cold like it's an old argument she's tired of losing, but too stubborn to walk away from. Her hands are deep in the dirt, what little of it she can reach. She's not planting. It's too early for that. She's clearing space, pushing aside last year's failed attempts, making room for possibility. Maybe turnips this year, maybe beans, maybe nothing at all. The soil doesn't promise anything. It never does. But still she digs. Behind her, she hears Ronolf trying to repair the fence. Again. The wood's too old, the nails are too few, but he's out there with a hammer and a curse on his lips, doing what he can with what little they have. That's all anyone does here. Not because it's noble. Because it's necessary. Inside, Elga is sweeping. It's not a big house, one room, one broom. Still, she moves like she's clearing a palace. Every sweep carries a little more hope than dust. Matilda smiles. She can't help it. There's something beautiful about that kind of stubborn optimism. Their mother sits by the fire, mending socks again. Her hands are slow, her fingers bent by years of work and cold, but her stitches are perfect. Each one tight, secure, exact. If you asked her how she learned, she wouldn't know. It wasn't taught. It was inherited, passed down like bone structure and bad knees. Matilda stands, brushing dirt from her hands, and looks out at the road that cuts through the village. It's quiet now, empty, but it won't stay that way. A cart will pass by. Someone will come with news. Maybe someone looking for work. Maybe someone looking to take what little they have. That's always a possibility. She walks back inside. The air is warmer. The fire has found its strength again. Her mother hums, something tuneless and old, something from her own mother, maybe. The kind of melody that doesn't need lyrics to make you feel safe. There's bread on the table now. It's cracked and rough, but golden on the bottom. Matilda tears off a piece. It's still warm, still soft in the center. Elga joins her. They eat in silence for a moment, the kind that only exists between people who know each other too well to need words. But even now, even in this calm, Matilda feels the weight of what comes next, because midday is the hardest part. It's when the body remembers that sleep is over, that rest is done, that the labor wasn't just a morning trial, it's a whole day contract. She finishes her bread, wipes her hands, and picks up the bucket again. There's more to carry, always more. The animals need more feed. The stream isn't close, but it's the only one not frozen. The barn roof is sagging again, and the last of the dried meat smells questionable. She doesn't complain, not because she's grateful, but because it doesn't change anything. The work doesn't shrink just because you grumble at it, so she moves, one foot in front of the other, steady, quiet, present, because that's the real rhythm of a medieval day, not bells, not schedules, but bodies, moving through cold, through hunger, through dirt and smoke and silence, guided only by necessity. And yet, there's a strange kind of peace in it, in knowing what comes next, in not having to choose. The day unfolds like a story already written. You just step into the next paragraph. Matilda reaches the stream. The water moves slowly, like it's reluctant to keep going. She cracks the edge of the ice again, watches the ripples spread. The trees around her are bare, their branches clawing at the sky. But under it all, there's life, waiting, hidden, sleeping. She fills the bucket, she turns back, and for a moment she pauses, looks out over the fields, the village, the smoke rising from chimneys, the worn path back to the house. She feels the ache in her arms, the chill on her skin, the breath in her lungs, and she feels okay. Not happy, not inspired, but rooted, like the ground beneath her is real, like her place in it is steady. She knows what's waiting back at the cottage, chores, heat, noise, maybe laughter, maybe another burn mark on the bread, but also sleep. Later, much later. And when it comes, it will come like it always does. Not asked for, not arranged, just earned. And when it does, she'll be ready. By the time Matilda returns from the stream, the sun has crested just past its peak, hanging heavy in the sky like a slow-burning candle. The light has shifted from morning's gentle gray to a sharper, more demanding glare. Shadows stretch long across the ground, thin and pointed like the bones of something ancient. The warmth of the fire inside the cottage fades the second she steps through the door, replaced by the mid-afternoon air that carries the scent of sweat, damp earth and wood smoke. The bucket in her hands sloshes slightly as she sets it down, her fingers red and stiff from the cold. She flexes them once, twice, just to remind them they still work. No one claps. No one thanks her. No one needs to. In this life, the reward for finishing one task is knowing the next one won't wait long. Inside, the house has grown louder. Elga is arguing with Ronulf over the broken door latch again. Godric is sulking in the corner, rubbing a scraped elbow he probably earned doing something he wasn't supposed to. Their mother, in her usual spot near the fire, simply raises one eyebrow and mutters a prayer under her breath, either for patience or divine intervention, it's unclear. Matilda ignores them all for now, not because she's tired of them, though yes, she is, but because there's something sacred about mid-afternoon. Not in the spiritual sense, though she figures saints must have also needed naps. It's sacred in its stillness, its predictability. It's the time of day when everything slows, not because people choose to, but because their bodies demand it. She pours water into the basin, starts washing the wooden bowls from lunch. The scraps were meager, bread, a smear of lard, and dried apples that tasted more like bark than fruit. But they filled the silence. Now the scent of those apples lingers in the water, sweet and sour all at once. The rhythm of the wash is soothing. Dip, scrub, rinse, stack. It doesn't require thought, doesn't leave room for worry. And that's a gift, because worry is always waiting just outside the door, like a stray dog with too many teeth. She thinks about the fields, how they're still too frozen to plow, about the grain stores already half gone and it's only midwinter, about the rumors of sickness in the next village over. No one's seen the baker's boy in a week. He was coughing last time he passed by, red-eyed and pale. She told herself it was just the cold. She still tells herself that. But it sits in the back of her mind like a pebble in a shoe. By the time the dishes are done, the light has shifted again. It's softer now, more golden. The edges of everything seem fuzzier, less defined. The fire crackles louder, catching stronger as evening creeps in. Elga, finally quiet, begins to prepare supper, a thin broth made with leftover root vegetables and the last of the dried herbs. The smell is earthy, comforting, and a little sad. Matilda joins her, cutting turnips with a knife that's more rust than blade. They don't speak. They don't need to. The silence is filled with the sounds of chopping, stirring, the occasional shuffle of feet across the rushes on the floor. Outside, the sky shifts toward dusk, painting the room in long shadows and orange light. As the sun sinks lower, the mood in the cottage changes. It always does. There's a kind of anticipation in the air. Not excitement, not dread, just readiness. Everyone starts to move slower, speak softer, hold eye contact longer. The world outside gets quieter, and the one inside seems to take a breath, as if bracing itself for night. Dinner is eaten quickly. No one lingers over the meal. Not because it's unpleasant, though no one's writing poems about turnip stew, but because there's work to do before darkness takes the last of the light. Matilda checks the door latch. Still broken. Ronulf mumbles something about fixing it tomorrow. Matilda doesn't argue. Tomorrow, if it comes, will bring its own demands. She steps outside one last time. The air is colder now, sharper, the kind that slips into your sleeves and up your spine like it's looking for a fight. The chickens are already huddled, feathers puffed. The sky is that specific shade of deep blue that only shows up right before stars. She takes a breath, holds it. This is her favorite moment, right here. Right before night, right before sleep, when everything seems paused, the in-between, the liminal. The world hasn't ended it yet and the next hasn't begun, just this one sliver of peace, sharp and fragile. She steps back inside. The house is dim now, lit only by firelight and the soft flicker of a single beeswax candle that sputters every time someone walks by too fast. Her mother is already tucked into her corner, wrapped in layers of fabric and dreams. Elga combs her hair with fingers, untangling the knots the day left behind. Ronulf is curled near the hearth, mumbling about nothing. Godric snores before he even lies down. Matilda lies down last, always last, not out of duty, not out of pride, but because she wants to remember, wants to see the fire die down, wants to watch the room fade into sleep. She wraps the blanket around herself, its familiar scent of smoke and hay, a kind of lullaby all on its own. Her body curls into itself, spine relaxing, fingers unclenching, and then darkness. The kind that doesn't frighten, the kind that welcomes. Because she knows, just like last night and the night before and the hundreds that came before that, first sleep will come, strong, sure, and after that, second sleep will find her again. The room falls silent, like a theater after the final curtain drops. The fire sinks low, casting long shadows across the uneven walls, licking the floor with a slow, tired light. The rushes on the ground rustle only when someone shifts in sleep. And Matilda, buried under her blanket with her breath warming the air beneath, closes her eyes into the kind of darkness that feels complete. Not frightening, not hollow, just full. First sleep arrives fast. Her body doesn't ask permission. It takes what it needs. Her mind, worn down by hours of bending, hauling, listening, biting her tongue, and pretending the cold didn't hurt, it finally stops narrating. There are no thoughts, no dreams, just weightlessness, just quiet. Somewhere in that darkness, time forgets itself. The fire dies. The candle burns out completely, leaving nothing but smoke curling toward the rafters. Outside, the wind starts again, pulling against the door, testing the broken latch. But inside, the cottage breathes in slow rhythm, the collective sleep of a family hardened by life, softened by ritual. And then, as if cued by something older than instinct, Matilda wakes. Not startled, not alarmed. She doesn't even open her eyes right away. It's subtle, a gentle surfacing. Her body doesn't feel like it was dragged from sleep. It feels like it floated to the edge on its own. The room is darker now, if that's possible. The fire is only a whisper of red beneath ash. She listens. The silence is deeper now, heavier. The kind that doesn't just fill the air, it presses into the chest, into the corners of thought. It's not empty, it's patient, waiting. Matilda turns slowly, careful not to disturb Elga. She knows this part of the night, this space, this quiet break between sleeps. It doesn't frighten her. She doesn't ask why she's awake. She simply is. And in that, there is calm. She sits up, the blanket falling into her lap. The cold greets her again, sharper this time, like it's reminding her who's in charge. She doesn't flinch, just pulls the shawl from beside her and wraps it around her shoulders. She doesn't light a candle, doesn't poke the fire. She moves through the dark by memory. Her hands find the wooden cup near the hearth. The water is cold, almost icy, but she drinks it anyway. It bites down her throat, clears her head. This is the hour of reflection. Not planning, not worrying, just thinking. Sometimes she remembers. Tonight she thinks of her father, his hands rougher than any tool, the way he laughed only with his eyes, how he used to whistle under his breath when working, not a tune, just a sound to keep the silence from getting too loud. He died last winter, no fanfare, just didn't wake up one morning, just stopped. She misses him most during these hours. Not during the day, when there's too much to do and too many reasons to keep moving, not during meals when everyone's too focused on chewing, but now. Now, when the world is quiet and sleep has been momentarily put on pause, she doesn't cry. She never does. Not because she doesn't feel, but because it's not what's done. Tears aren't useful here. They don't feed the animals or patch the roof. Instead, she thinks. She holds his memory like a coal in her palm, hot, flickering, real. Eventually, she stands. Her knees crack. The cold has crept into her joints. She walks toward the window, wipes a small circle of frost from the inside. Outside, the sky is thick with stars, brighter than she ever remembers seeing them. The moon hangs low, swollen, casting silver onto the snow. Everything looks softer under that light. Even the trees, those skeletal things clawing at the sky, seem gentle now. She hears it then. A distant owl, a flutter of wings. The low, guttural rumble of something unseen, maybe a fox, maybe her imagination. She stays there, watching, breathing. Not searching for answers, just allowing the night to be what it is. This time of waking, this intermission, isn't wasted. It's part of the process, part of what gives her the strength to carry through the next half of sleep, and then the next day, and the one after that. When she finally returns to her place on the straw, she doesn't rush. She lowers herself carefully, wrapping the blanket around her legs, then her torso, tucking herself into that human shape she's carved into the floor over years. The warmth takes time to return, but it does. Her eyes close, she breathes, and second sleep arrives. Slower this time, deeper, more vivid. It carries her down like water drawing back to the sea, and in her dreams, she is not in a cottage, not wrapped in straw and smoke. She is in a field, barefoot, laughing, and her father is there. Not whole, not complete, but enough. enough to carry her through till morning. Second sleep had taken her, pulled her under like a familiar tide. Matilda drifted in its depth, warm and buried beneath layers of dream and breath. In that stillness, everything softened. Her father's face came back again, more vivid than the night before. He wasn't young, but he wasn't dying either. Just there, smiling like the world wasn't cold and harsh and unforgiving. Just smiling, like he knew something she didn't. In the dream, he led her to a field. It wasn't the brittle, half-frozen dirt she knew. It was green, impossibly green, and the sky was so wide it felt like it could swallow her whole. He pointed to the horizon, but when she turned to look, he was gone. Not abruptly, just not there anymore. And she knew that meant she had to wake. The air in the cottage was colder than before. The fire was no more than a soft red pulse in the hearth, like a heartbeat waiting to be stoked. Matilda's eyes opened slowly. She didn't sit up yet, just breathed. Felt the way the straw had shifted under her. Felt the spot on her shoulder where the cold had crept in. Second sleep wasn't over, but something was calling her out of it. And then 3 knocks. Not loud, not urgent, but real. She sat up fast, pulse suddenly sharp in her chest. No one knocked at this hour, not unless something was wrong. Her heart was already moving before her hands found her shawl, before her legs remembered the cold of the floor. She stepped lightly, trying not to disturb Elga. Godric predictably slept like a sack of turnips. She opened the door just a crack. Thomas stood there, cloak dusted with frost, eyes wide in that way people get when they've been moving too fast for too long. "Matilda," he said, hushed but hurried. "It's your uncle. The mill wheel broke loose. He's hurt. Bad." She didn't ask questions. There wasn't time for that. She turned, scribbled a note for her mother, tucked it under the candle stub, and shoved her feet into her boots. They were still damp from yesterday, stiff and unforgiving, but there was no luxury in changing them. By the time she stepped outside, Thomas had already turned toward the road. They walked fast, no talking. The wind cut sideways through the valley, howling like it had something to prove. Trees creaked above them. The snow underfoot was crusted with ice, loud with every step. But neither of them slowed. The mill sat on the far edge of the river, where the land dipped just enough to give water the illusion of power. In daylight, it was beautiful. Slats of wood spun golden by sunlight, wheel turning lazy circles beside it. But now, in the dark, it looked broken, bent, like something had tried to crawl out of the ground and halfway succeeded. Smoke still curled from the chimney, weak and frantic. The door was open. Inside, the warmth hit her first, thick and smoky. Then the smell. Blood, damp wool, something metallic. Her uncle lay on a bench near the fire. His leg was wrong, twisted at a cruel angle beneath his tunic. A woman Matilda didn't recognize was holding a cloth to his head, her hands red but steady. Matilda dropped beside him without hesitation. "He's been drifting," the woman said. "Head struck the wall. We stopped the bleeding, but he's cold. He's so cold." Matilda didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She moved like someone who's done this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. "Boil water," she said to Thomas. "Now." She took the cloth, dipped it in a fresh basin, wiped her uncle's forehead. His eyes fluttered, barely. "Uncle," she whispered. "It's me, Matilda." A groan, barely more than breath. But it was something. They worked for hours. Wrapping, splinting, feeding him sips of broth they barely had to spare. Matilda's hands shook once when she tied the last cloth around his leg, but only once. She wouldn't allow more than that. Not until she knew he was out of danger. When the worst was done, when he was sleeping soundly, Matilda finally stepped outside. The sky was starting to change again, stars fading, the first thread of dawn unwinding across the horizon. She sat on the steps of the mill, boots soaked through, arms crossed tight around her, and for a long moment she didn't move. She just breathed. Second sleep was long gone. First light was creeping back in. The ache in her shoulders was deep, her fingers raw, her throat dry from smoke and silence, but she was alive. He was alive, and that somehow was enough. She thought of her father then, of that dream field, of how he pointed to something she couldn't see. Maybe it wasn't a field, maybe it was just this life, this night, this breath. Matilda smiled, not big, but real. The first colors of dawn arrived like a whisper, thin streaks of silver and pale blue unfurling across the eastern sky. Matilda sat on the wooden steps of the mill, elbows on her knees, her breath forming clouds that disappeared almost as quickly as they came. The world was quiet, Not in that sleepy night kind of way, but the quiet that follows something intense, the kind of stillness you earn. Inside, her uncle slept. Shallow breaths, face pale but alive. The mill had become a kind of accidental sanctuary overnight, a place where time had folded in on itself, where things had happened so quickly, yet the night felt endless. Matilda still smelled of smoke, still had dried blood on her hands, and her body ached from crouching, lifting, working. But the adrenaline was gone now. What replaced it was something heavier, slower. She turned her face toward the morning and squinted. It was a soft light, not the kind that blinds or shouts, the kind that slowly tugs everything out of shadow. And with it came the awareness that soon the rest of the village would wake, that the routine would begin again, that breakfast fires would be lit, animals would stir, children would complain, that the rest of the world, blissfully unaware of her night, would pick up right where it left off. Thomas reappeared, stepping outside, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes looked like they hadn't blinked in hours. "He's resting," he said simply. Matilda nodded. There wasn't much else to say. They both understood that resting didn't mean healed, didn't mean safe. It just meant he'd bought himself a little more time. "You should get home," Thomas added after a long silence. "Your family will be wondering." Matilda blinked toward the horizon where the light was beginning to grow teeth, where the sky changed from gray to gold. "Not yet," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her, hoarse, distant. It was the first time she'd spoken in over an hour. Thomas didn't push. He just sat down beside her on the step, boots thudding against the wood. They both stared at the fields, the trees just starting to wake under the sun's early gaze. After a while, she asked, "Do you ever think about leaving?" It wasn't a question she expected him to answer. It wasn't even clear if she meant the village, the valley, or just the kind of life they were born into, mud and splinters and responsibility that always came early and never let up. He was quiet for a long time. Then, sometimes, it was enough. The honesty of it. She sighed, leaned forward, resting her forehead on her hands. Her eyes burned. She hadn't cried, not during the night, not even when her uncle winced so hard it looked like he might never open his eyes again. But now, in the calm, in the daylight, it started to catch up. Not full tears, not sobbing, just a heaviness, a thick knot behind the ribs. They sat like that for a while, two silhouettes against the rising light, neither speaking, both carrying more than they should. Eventually, Matilda stood. Her body resisted. Her legs were stiff, her shoulders sore, her neck felt like it had aged a decade overnight. But she moved anyway, because that's what you do. You move. She stepped inside once more, just to glance at her uncle, still sleeping. The woman who had helped earlier was dozing in a chair now, her chin resting against her chest. Matilda placed a fresh cloth on the table beside the fire, left a note scrawled in smudged charcoal. "We'll return by midday. Thank you. Keep warm." Then she left. The walk back was different in daylight. Familiar landmarks took on new shapes. Trees that had loomed as monsters in the dark now looked friendly again, their bare branches reaching up like old men stretching. The wind was quieter now, and though the cold still clung to everything, the sun had begun its slow, persistent chase. Matilda's boots squelched in half-frozen mud. Her eyes scanned the road ahead but didn't really see it. Her mind was still inside the mill, replaying every moment. The twist of her uncle's leg, the blood, the cold sweat on his face, the weight of it all. By the time the cottage came into view, the sky had turned that bright, brutal blue that only winter mornings can manage. Her mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed, not angry, just waiting. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wall. Elga rushed forward, eyes wide. Ronulf peeked out from under a blanket, pretending not to care but watching closely. Even Godric was quiet for once. No one asked questions, they just made space. Her mother handed her a bowl of porridge, thick and steaming. Matilda sat by the fire, back aching, spooning the food into her mouth like she hadn't eaten in days. It was bland. It was perfect. Finally, her mother spoke. "Will he make it?" Matilda swallowed, wiped her mouth. "I think so." And that was enough. The rest of the morning passed in fragments, scrubbing, stirring, feeding the chickens. The chores still had to be done, and Matilda did them. Not quickly, not efficiently, but steadily. She was tired in a way that couldn't be slept off. But still, when she looked out the window, when she saw the frost melting from the edges of the thatch, she felt something shift. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. A breath, a thaw, a pause between the weight of what had happened and whatever would come next. And in that space, she found just enough strength to keep going. The morning sun hadn't fully risen when Matilda stood again at the threshold of her cottage. The cold hadn't left. It clung to her skin, sharp and insistent, but it felt more manageable today. Maybe it was the relief that her uncle was still breathing. Maybe it was the sheer exhaustion that made everything seem less urgent. Or maybe it was that strange kind of steadiness that comes after you've done something hard and survived it. She let the door creak open behind her and stepped out onto the hardened dirt, boots hitting the ground with a deliberate thud. Around her, the village was slowly waking up, shaking off sleep like snow from a roof. A few early risers moved in the distance, shoulders hunched against the wind, faces half hidden under wool. No one said much this early. Words didn't come until the second cup of warmth, or until the sun cleared the trees. She'd only been back home for a few hours, but she couldn't sit still. Her mother had tried to insist she rest. "You'll fall over, girl, and we'll be tripping over your body by supper." But Matilda had smiled, kissed her mother's cheek, and grabbed her shawl. Rest would come later. Right now, the rhythm of the day needed her to fall in step. She passed the bakery, already lit from within. The smell of rising dough wrapped around her like a spell. For a moment, she let herself imagine having a slice of warm bread, soft and perfect. But they couldn't afford that this week. Flour had grown scarce, and everything had to stretch farther than anyone liked. Still, the scent gave her something to carry. Her uncle's mill wasn't far, just past the low rise where the old trees stood like crooked guards. When she arrived, Thomas was already there, hauling water from the trough. His sleeves were rolled, hair tousled, face drawn from too many nights that looked like the one they'd just survived. "He's inside," he said, not bothering with a greeting. She nodded, brushed past him gently, and stepped into the mill. Her uncle was sitting near the fire. He looked smaller than she remembered, more like a man tucked inside his own shell. His leg was wrapped with fresh cloth, but his face was what caught her, that strange mix of pain and determination. Like he was fighting with himself to stay useful. "You came back," he said, voice rough. "I said I would." He smiled a little, winced, and gestured toward a pile of tools still covered in frost. "The gears still need clearing. If they freeze again, we'll lose another day." She didn't answer. She just moved. For the next few hours, Matilda worked with her hands in the cold, breath clouding in front of her. She cleared slush, refitted panels, scrubbed the ice off the wooden beams. Thomas joined her in silence. They moved like people who'd been through something together, but didn't need to speak about it yet. When midday came, they paused, shared a piece of dried meat, chewed slowly, drank from a shared cup of cider that tasted faintly of apples and mostly of smoke. It wasn't a feast, it wasn't even comfort, but it was enough to remind them they were still standing. "I heard there's sickness in the southern hills," Thomas said finally. Matilda looked up. "Like plague?" He shrugged. "Could be nothing. Could be travelers bringing bad air." She nodded. "We should be careful. We always are." But they both knew that wasn't true. People got tired, they forgot to boil water, they shared too much bread, they let the wrong stranger inside, and then suddenly half the village was digging graves in frozen dirt. When the light began to shift again, when the wind took on that low hum that always signaled evening, Matilda packed up her tools and helped her uncle to his feet. He walked with her to the door, leaning on her arm like a child who had forgotten his strength. "Thank you," he murmured. She didn't answer, just squeezed his hand. The walk home was slower. Her arms ached, her fingers throbbed, her shoulders felt like sacks of grain tied too tight. But still, she moved. The wind pulled at her clothes, trying to turn her around, but the light from the cottage called her forward. Inside, the fire was alive again. Godric was telling a story, something wildly exaggerated if Elga's eye roll was any indication. Ronulf sat near the window, carving something small and crooked. Her mother looked up as Matilda stepped in and gave her that look, that rare look of soft approval, the kind that said, "You did what needed doing." Matilda peeled off her shawl, set down her tools, and sat. The stew was warm, thin, but full of flavor. She didn't ask what was in it, didn't care. They ate slowly. No one asked about the mill. No one needed to. That night, when Matilda lay back on her straw bed, the fire low, her limbs sore and singing, she let out a long breath. It came from deep, somewhere near the center of her ribs, and it carried with it the weight of everything she'd carried. Outside, the wind softened, the stars blinked awake, and sleep came, not like a wave, but like a hand. Gentle, knowing, pulling her back into the dark, where her father might be waiting in that green field, smiling without a word. The early light of morning trickled in through the cracks in the wooden shutters, splintering the cottage's dim interior into ribbons of pale gold. Matilda blinked herself awake, not with alarm or dread, but with that quiet acceptance one only learns from years of repetition. Her body was sore, her hands throbbed from the cold work the day before, but she sat up anyway, brushing straw from her skirt and breathed deeply. The air smelled of fire smoke, damp wool, and porridge someone had already started cooking. Elga, likely, always the first to rise when the frost came thick. Matilda stretched her back until it cracked like the floorboards beneath her, then moved to the basin and splashed her face with cold water, the shock of it dragging her further into the waking world. She dressed quickly, wrapping herself in layers that barely held back the cold. Her boots were still wet, of course. They always were. No one had enough leather or sunshine to dry anything properly in winter. But they'd do. They had to. Outside, the village was quieter than usual. A light snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in a thin crust of white that sparkled when the sunlight caught it just right. Smoke twisted out of chimneys like sleepy snakes, and a few distant roosters announced the day with more enthusiasm than seemed appropriate. Today, Matilda had two missions: bring food to her uncle at the mill and check the boundary markers along the south path. Neither task was urgent in the dramatic sense, but both mattered deeply in the slow, grinding way that kept the village alive. She packed a cloth bundle of bread, stew, and a few slivers of dried apple for her uncle. He'd need something warm in his stomach if he was going to stand at all today. She slipped out without fanfare, her family still wrapped in blankets and dreams. The road to the mill was easier now than it had been days ago. Snow made everything slicker, but also softer, covering the rough patches in a hush. When she reached the mill, she knocked once before letting herself in. Her uncle sat near the fire, leg propped up, face still pale, but less strained. The look he gave her wasn't one of gratitude or surprise, just recognition, as if her presence was inevitable. "You've come again," he said simply. "I always do." She handed him the bundle, and he unwrapped it with the reverence of a man who understood how much effort each bite represented. They spoke little. She tended the fire, swept the floor, adjusted the shutters to keep the wind from howling through the gaps. When she turned to leave, he only said, "Thank you, girl," but it was enough to warm her more than the fire had. Back outside, the sun was higher now, and the world had shaken off some of its sleepiness. The wind had picked up, that tugging at her shawl and whispering warnings of more snow to come. She made her way south toward the marker stones. The path wound through brush and bramble over a creek that had frozen into jagged ice and beneath trees that stood like bare-boned guardians. She knew each turn by heart, each mossy stump and leaning fence post. The markers mattered. They were ancient, stones set long before her great-grandmother had been born, marking the edge of their village's claim. More than once, other villages had tried to move them subtly, inch by inch, a silent war fought with rocks instead of swords. Matilda wasn't going to let that happen. Not on her watch. When she reached the first stone, she crouched beside it, brushing away the snow. Still in place, she ran her fingers along its edges, checking for signs of tampering. None. She moved on. The second marker stood beside an old tree stump. This one had always made her nervous. It sat close to the road, enough easy to disturb, but when she reached it, she froze. The stone was off, slightly, just a few inches to the left, but she'd walked this path since she was small, and she knew someone had moved it. She stood slowly, heart beating faster. Her eyes scanned the forest, the empty road. No sound but the wind and the caw of a crow overhead. She didn't know who had done it or when, but this was a message, a quiet one, a calculated one, and not meant to be friendly. She knelt again, had planted her boots against the ground, and heaved. The stone was heavier than she remembered, or maybe she was just tired. It took 3 tries, but she pushed it back into place, lining it with the shadow of the tree stump as best she could. Then she took a charcoal stub from her pouch and marked the base of the stone. A trick her uncle had taught her. If someone moved it again, she'd know for sure. By the time she started back toward the village, the wind had grown cruel. Her cheeks were raw and her hands felt like blocks of ice inside her gloves, but her mind was sharper than ever. Someone was testing the boundaries, and she was going to be ready. When she reached the cottage, Elga opened the door with a sigh of relief. "You were gone too long," she said. "We thought maybe—" "I'm fine," Matilda answered. "The stones aren't." Her mother looked up from the hearth. Her face didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Tell me everything." And so she did. Over stew and firelight, while the others listened with wide eyes, Matilda recounted every step, every mark, every shift in the wind. The danger was quiet, but it was there. Later, when the house grew still and the world slipped back towards sleep, Matilda lay awake longer than usual. The boundary had held, but only just. The wind didn't let up. It danced cruelly across the fields, tugging at cloaks and turning noses red. Matilda pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her fingers gripping the edge with practiced urgency. But no amount of wool could chase away the sense that something had changed. Something more than frost and snow. Since she'd found the shifted marker, her world had felt a half step off beat, like a song sung slightly out of tune. And now, standing in the village square, listening to Thomas speak of a second boundary stone moved, and not just moved, but marred, Matilda felt that song sour into something darker. "We can't let this continue," she said, voice loud over the murmuring crowd. The villagers, usually hesitant, met her words with nods. Even old Brenwick, who rarely agreed with anything that didn't involve ale or sleep, crossed his arms and said, "She's right." So they made a plan. Not a grand, glorious one, but a practical one, the way their ancestors had done before them. They would walk the bounds, as a group, as a village, like in the old stories, where the land was remembered not by maps but by memory, by children tapping stones, by elders singing the stories into the dirt. They met the next morning, just after dawn. The air was sharp enough to slice bread. Elga had baked small loaves, wrapped in cloth and handed out like blessings. The priest, who had once claimed gout would prevent him from any unnecessary pilgrimages, showed up with a staff and a look that dared anyone to question him. Even the children, usually impossible to herd, stood quiet and eager, sensing the gravity of the moment. Matilda led the way. The first marker stood beneath an old oak, half buried in snow and older than most of the village's roofs. She knelt beside it, brushed away the frost, and tapped it 3 times with a stick, lightly, reverently. A boy behind her mimicked the motion, then giggled. She smiled but said nothing. This was how memory worked, through rhythm, through repetition, through story. At each marker, they paused. The priest recited a psalm. Someone added a memory. "This is where the fox den used to be," or "My father once broke his ankle here chasing pigs." They walked slowly, deliberately weaving history back into the land, and then they reached the defaced stone. It was as bad as Thomas had said. The village crest, 3 crossed branches within a circle, had been gouged out. Deep, angry scrapes replaced it. Not weather, not time, deliberate hands. The villagers fell silent. Matilda stared at it for a long time. Then she turned to the group. "We'll place a new one," she said. "Right here. Taller, stronger, and we'll carve our mark deep enough that no one forgets." It took the better part of the afternoon. They hauled a slab from near the quarry, rough, uneven, but proud. While some fetched tools, others warmed their hands by a fire built right there in the snow. Children helped dig, elders supervised, someone sang, and soon the rest joined in. Thomas carved the crest. His hands were steady, his focus unwavering. By the time the sun began to slip toward the trees, the symbol was finished. 3 bold branches, circled and surrounded by etchings of hands. Before they left, each villager touched the new stone. Matilda went last. She pressed her palm against it, fingers spread. "Let them come again," she whispered, not as a challenge, but a vow. "We'll still be here." That night, the feast was small but warm. Bread, root stew, a bit of salted pork saved from the last slaughter. They crammed into the meeting hall, the fire roaring, bodies pressed together in laughter and exhaustion. Children slept curled against benches. Elders traded stories over cider. And somewhere in the corner, someone played a lute so softly it sounded like the wind humming through the eaves. Matilda sat beside Elga, her legs stretched out, her back against the wall. Her muscles ached in ways that promised bruises by morning, but her spirit felt sturdy, like that stone. Thomas found her before she slipped away. "Thank you," he said, "for starting this, for not staying quiet." She looked at him, eyes tired but firm. "I don't think we get to stay quiet anymore." "No," he agreed. "I don't think we do." The walk home was slow. The snow had softened under so many feet, and her boots sunk deeper now. But she didn't mind. The stars above were sharp and bright, and each breath she took felt clean in her chest. At her doorstep, she turned back, looked toward the woods where the marker lay. They might come again, she knew. Whoever they were, bandits, rival villagers, someone desperate or angry or cruel. But now they'd know. This land was watched, guarded, remembered, and Matilda would be the first to remind them. The wind had changed again. It no longer felt like a whisper or even a warning. Now, it was something worse. Quiet, too quiet, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Matilda stood by the old well at the eastern ridge, the fresh boundary marker behind her, the scent of carved oak still lingering in the air. Around her, the village moved cautiously. They spoke in lowered voices, glanced at the trees more than usual, and sent their children inside at the first hint of dusk. The ceremony had lifted spirits for a time. The singing, the stories, the new marker, it had all reminded them of who they were. But reminders only last so long when threats keep knocking on your door. 3 days had passed since they found the defaced marker by the sacred ground. 3 long, uneasy days. Nothing had happened since. No more stones moved, no strange symbols. But that didn't bring comfort. If anything, it made things worse. Because now they were waiting for a shoe they couldn't see to drop. That evening, Thomas found her at the mill. "They're watching," he said quietly, eyes flicking toward the woods. "I saw them. 2 figures just beyond the tree line, not close enough to shout to, not far enough to pretend I didn't see." Matilda felt something harden in her chest. Did they move? No, just stood, watching, then gone. It would have been easier if they'd shouted, or stolen something, or burned the fields. At least then they'd know what they were dealing with. But this was worse. Whoever they were patient. "We need to set watches," she said. That night, the villagers posted sentries. It wasn't a large village, and there weren't many strong backs to spare, but every man and woman who could hold a torch or swing a stick took a shift. Even Brenwick volunteered, though no one was sure if he did it to help or to grumble with purpose. Matilda took the midnight watch. The woods were darker than pitch. Her breath fogged in front of her as she paced the path near the eastern marker. The torch in her hand cast flickering light that made shadows jump and lurch. She listened, really listened, to every rustle, every creak of the trees, but nothing came. Still, when her watch ended and Elga came to relieve her, Matilda didn't sleep. She sat by the fire in her cottage, boots still on, heart beating a rhythm she couldn't quiet. She watched the flames until dawn and wondered what kind of enemy didn't even need to act to scare a whole village into silence. The next day, her mother fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but by noon she had a fever, and by sunset she could barely speak. Matilda felt a new kind of fear, the creeping kind. Not loud, not sudden, just steady. Her mother was the strongest person she knew, stronger than any man who lifted barrels or swung axes, and now she lay in bed, skin pale, eyes too bright, her breathing shallow. They sent for the healer. He brought herbs and poultices and said words meant to soothe. But even he didn't look convinced. "We've seen this before," he whispered to Matilda outside the door. "Last winter in the village west of here. Only a few survived." The sickness had a name, though no one liked to say it. It took the old first, then the children. And sometimes when it was feeling particularly cruel, it took the strongest, just to remind everyone that strength didn't matter. Matilda didn't sleep for 2 nights. She fed her mother broth, wiped her brow, changed her sheets. She sang old songs under her breath, ones her mother used to hum while sewing. The fire burned low, her hope burned lower. And then, on the 3rd morning, her mother opened her eyes and said, "I'm hungry." Matilda laughed so hard she cried. But the sickness had spread. By the week's end, 3 more villagers were coughing. One was a boy barely 5. Another was the blacksmith's wife. The 3rd was the baker, whose absence meant no bread unless someone stepped in. The healer did his best. So did Matilda. So did everyone. But the fear changed shape. It wasn't just about boundaries anymore. Now it was survival. And through it all, the Watchers never came back. Or if they did, they were better at hiding. No more stones moved. No more symbols appeared. But Matilda couldn't shake the feeling that the sickness was their doing. That it hadn't come from the wind or bad luck. That someone had brought it. "It's not just the land they want," she told Thomas one night as they chopped firewood behind the mill. "It's us off it." Thomas nodded. "Then they'll learn something real fast." "What's that?" "We don't leave." It wasn't a battle cry, but it was enough. They doubled the watches, reinforced the borders, planted herbs at the edge of the forest, not just for healing, but as a warning, a line, not to be crossed. And in the meantime, the village carried on. Matilda baked bread, Thomas sharpened tools, Elga sang lullabies to the children. The world might have changed, the danger might have been growing, but they weren't gone. And sometimes that was the best resistance they could give. The first frost came early that year. Sharp, silver-tipped grass crunched under boots, and each breath turned to mist in the air. The village was quieter now, quieter than usual, not from sleep, but from fear. It wasn't just the sickness anymore. It wasn't just the markers. It was the sense that something unseen was getting closer. Matilda could feel it in her bones. After they'd found the sacred well marker defaced, the villagers had come together. The new oak marker still stood proud, carved deeply with their emblem, as if daring someone to try again. But no one had come. That was the strangest part. There were no more sightings, no more footprints, no more marks in the snow. It was too quiet. Danger wasn't loud. It waited. And Matilda knew they were being watched still. Her mother was recovering, thank the gods. The fever had broken, and she'd started humming again when she stirred porridge at the fire. That alone gave Matilda some hope. But the village needed more than hope. It needed action. So she called a meeting. It wasn't formal. No one wore their good cloaks or brought fresh bread. They just came. Farmers, shepherds, even the grumbling blacksmith. They met in the central hall, candles flickering and firewood crackling as the wind pounded at the shutters like an impatient guest. "We need to scout," Matilda said simply. "Out beyond the ridge. We need to know what's out there." Murmurs followed, some fearful, some angry. "Too risky," said one. "They want us to leave the village exposed." "That's why we don't all go," Matilda replied. "Just a few. One day's journey, out and back." Silence. Then Thomas spoke. "I'll go." And just like that, it was settled. 3 went. Thomas, the hunter named Wulfric, and young Halden, whose quietness hid a mind sharp as flint. They left at dawn, cloaks drawn tight, provisions packed, each carrying a short blade and a bow. Matilda watched them disappear into the tree line. Then she waited, and waited. The first night passed with no sign. The second came with a snow flurry that painted the world white. On the third day, just as the village was starting to fear the worst, Wulfric returned, alone. He was bloodied, limping, face pale with cold and shock. "They were ready for us," he said, and then collapsed. Matilda helped tend to his wounds. The healer stitched the gash on his leg, wrapped the bruises on his ribs. It was a long night before he could speak again. "They had camps," he rasped, eyes hollow, "beyond the ridge. Not many, maybe 10, but armed, organized." "And Thomas?" Matilda asked. Wulfric shook his head. "Taken. Alive. Halden too, I think." The words hit like a hammer. The villagers, especially the young ones, looked to Thomas like a kind of hero. Strong, steady, the sort of man who never flinched. And Halden, with his quick hands and clever eyes, he hadn't even seen 20 summers. "We have to go after them," Matilda said. "We can't leave them." "Or we risk the whole village," the elder Brenwick growled. "You want to lead more of us into a trap?" Matilda stood slowly. "I want to bring them home." A beat of silence. Then a voice. "So do I. Elga." Then another. And another. They made a plan. That night, under the cover of snowfall and darkness, Matilda led 6 villagers into the woods. Wulfric couldn't travel, but he gave them directions, landmarks, paths, warnings. They moved like ghosts. No torches, only moonlight. The woods creaked around them, every snap of twig setting nerves on edge. But they pressed on. By dawn, they reached the first camp. It was deserted, but not empty. The fire pit was still warm, blankets, footprints, signs of a hurried departure. And then they found the note, carved into the bark of a tree. "Come further, and he dies." The message was clear, but so was Matilda's resolve. They tracked for hours, snow swallowing their footsteps, wind biting their faces. Just before dusk, they found the second camp. This one was different, quiet, still, abandoned. But it held something the first had not: hope. Halden. He was tied to a post, weak but alive. They freed him quickly, covered his shivering body with cloaks, fed him sips of broth. They split us, he whispered. Took Thomas north, said he was insurance. Matilda's heart sank, but they didn't return to the village just yet. Not without Thomas. Instead, they pressed on. One more night in the woods, one more chance, and just before sunrise, they found them. Thomas, chained near a fire, 2 guards, sleeping. Matilda didn't wait. She signaled the others, crept forward like a shadow, and struck. It wasn't a fair fight. It was quick, brutal, desperate. But it ended with Thomas free and the guards bound. They didn't ask questions. They didn't leave warnings. They just went home. When they returned, the village wept, not out of fear, but relief. Thomas limped but smiled. Halden slept for days. Wulfric wept when he saw them. And the people of the village, they stood taller, walked prouder. They had defended their land, and now they had reclaimed their own. The snow began falling the next morning, soft at first, like the sky hadn't quite made up its mind. But by mid-afternoon, the village was cloaked in white. The roofs disappeared beneath layers of powder. Smoke curled upward in slow spirals from chimneys, the only movement in a world otherwise still. Matilda stood at the gate of the village, eyes fixed on the woods beyond the ridge. The rescue of Thomas and Halden had done more than bring 2 beloved souls home. It had rallied the spirit of the people, but deep down, Matilda knew it was temporary. What they'd found beyond those trees wasn't a few rogue wanderers, it was a warning, and whoever had sent it hadn't finished speaking. She stepped back from the gate and began her rounds, boots crunching through snow, breath clouding before her. She checked each post where a villager stood watch. She asked for nothing, just looked them in the eyes, gave a nod. That was enough. In the square, Elga was handing out rations, dried meat, root vegetables, leftover stew. The village wasn't starving, not yet, but supplies would grow thin if winter lasted long. And with hunters afraid to wander too far, their options narrowed each day. They'd started laying traps near the edge of the woods, small ones mostly for rabbits or birds. But even that wasn't safe. Just yesterday, Wulfric returned with 2 snap traps and a dead fox left hanging from a branch nearby. Skinned, marked. They want us to know they're watching, he'd said. Then we'll watch right back, Matilda had replied. That night, the village slept in shifts. Fires were kept low, sentries were doubled. The children were kept inside, and windows were shuttered tight. Matilda stayed up, pacing slowly from her mother's cottage to the edge of the square, ears tuned for anything unusual. And sometime past midnight, she heard it. A horn. Not close, but not far either. One long low note that stretched out into the dark like a thread waiting to snap. She froze. Listened. Then silence. By morning, most of the village had heard it too. They gathered in the square, faces pale, waiting for answers that wouldn't come. It could have been an animal, someone offered weakly. Or it could have been them, said another, telling us they're ready. Matilda raised a hand. The voices died down. We won't panic, she said, but we also won't wait for them to knock on our doors. So they built barricades, logs, barrels, whatever they could find. They reinforced the watchtower, dug trenches along the south edge of the village, traps, ropes, signal bells, anything that could buy them time or warn them of danger. And then they waited. On the 3rd day, the snow stopped. The sky turned a flat, gray-white, too still, the kind of still that made your skin crawl. That night, just as Matilda was preparing to take her turn on the northern watch, a horn sounded again. This time, closer, then another, then another. 3 long calls. The village erupted into motion. Men and women took positions. Arrows were notched. Fires were stoked high. Children were hidden in cellars. And at the gate, Matilda stood, sword in hand, eyes forward. For an hour, nothing happened. Then shadows appeared at the edge of the trees. Not many, 5, maybe 6. Figures draped in cloaks, faces hidden, standing just beyond the light. Watching. One stepped forward. Matilda of the Ridge, the voice called. Male, calm, cold. You've pushed beyond your border. Now you will pay for it. Matilda took a step forward. You took our people. You defaced our sacred land. You brought sickness to our door. We brought a warning, the man replied. You ignored it. You don't scare us, she said. Then we failed. For now. And with that, they vanished into the trees. The snow began falling again. Back in the square, Matilda gathered the village. "They won't attack yet," she said, "but they're not done." "So what do we do?" asked Elga. "We survive, we stay sharp, and we remember this is our home. We don't leave, we don't forget." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood at the watchtower, looking out over the snow, heart beating slow and heavy. The village was safe, for now, but war was coming, and they would be ready. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. The village lay quiet beneath the pale morning sky, its rooftops dusted with new snow and its paths littered with footprints and broken arrows. Smoke drifted from the chimneys, mixing with the scent of ash and earth. It should have been a moment of rest, of relief. But Matilda didn't feel either. She stood in the center of the village square, watching as people moved with quiet efficiency, patching walls, gathering supplies, tending the wounded. Every person had a role, a task. Even the children helped, fetching water or carrying messages. It was the kind of unity that only hardship could forge. And hardship had come knocking, again and again. Beside her stood the boy they had rescued. His name, they now knew, was Arlen. 10 years old, barely more than skin and bone. He hadn't spoken much since they'd brought him back, only offering fragments. "The dark men, the camp, they took my brother." His eyes had seen too much, far too much. Matilda placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Small progress. She gave him a nod and sent him toward Elga, who had taken it upon herself to cook a warm meal for every soul in the village that morning. "Still no sign of them?" Thomas asked, approaching from the southern barricade. His shoulder was bandaged, a shallow cut still seeping slightly through the cloth. "None," Matilda said. "They've retreated for now, but they'll be back." Thomas nodded grimly. "They didn't expect us to fight back like that." "No," she agreed, "they didn't." But that was the problem. Now they would come prepared. The raiders weren't just thieves or vagabonds. They had strategy, coordination. Someone was leading them, and leading them well. That scarred man with the cold eyes, he hadn't fought like a brute. He fought like a commander. Matilda gathered the council again that afternoon. They met in the longhouse back, where the fire crackled low and shadows played across the wooden beams. The air smelled of pine resin and wet wool. "We wounded them," Matilda said. "We sent a message. But if we sit here and wait, they will return. Stronger." "What do you suggest?" asked Brenwick, the old carpenter, voice weary. "We prepare for siege," she replied. "We can't afford another surprise. We strengthen the walls. We stockpile food, and we send a scout to find out who they are, what they want." "Who would volunteer for such a thing?" someone asked. "I will," said Wulfric, stepping forward. "I know the woods. I owe this village everything." Matilda gave a nod of gratitude. "You won't go alone. Take Halden with you. His eyes are sharp and he's quiet." The rest of the meeting was spent planning, routes, signals, contingency plans. It felt endless, but necessary. They couldn't afford to lose another inch of ground. Not now. That night, Matilda walked the perimeter of the village alone. She moved slowly, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, eyes scanning the darkness. The moon hung high, casting a pale glow over the trees. The wind was still, the kind that made even silence feel loud. She found herself at the old well, the one by the eastern ridge. The new marker they'd placed after the first desecration still stood, though it bore a fresh cut across its side, an intentional scar. A warning. She touched the wood, traced the slash with her fingers. "They fear us now," Thomas said, approaching behind her. "For now," she replied. "But fear fades. They'll remember their numbers, their weapons. And we'll remember why we fight." Matilda turned to him, saw the fire in his eyes. He'd changed since the raid, leaner, tougher, more focused. They all had. This village was no longer just a dot on someone's map. It was a symbol, a stand. In the days that followed, the village transformed. Walls were rebuilt with reinforced timber. The blacksmith worked from dawn till dusk, forging blades, arrowheads, and nails. The fields were covered, protected from frost, and in the longhouse they trained, men and women alike, learning to fight, to survive. Wulfric and Halden returned after 4 days. They were exhausted, bruised, but alive. "They're not just raiders," Wulfric said. "They have a base, fortified, north of the frozen stream. Maybe 40 of them, maybe more. They have prisoners, slaves." Matilda felt her stomach twist. "And they're building something, a wall, a gate." "Preparing for war," Elga muttered. Matilda nodded. "Then we won't wait for it to come to us." Gasps, echoed in the hall. Eyes widened. You want to attack them? Someone asked. We have to, she said. Not head on. Not yet, but we can hit their supply runs, free the prisoners, bleed them slowly. It was bold, dangerous, but necessary. The village was no longer just defending itself. It was taking a stand for others too. And so the next chapter began, one of resistance, of fire and snow, of shadow and steel. Matilda knew the path ahead would be harder, the cost greater, but the flame inside her and inside her people burned brighter than ever. And fire, once kindled, is hard to put out. The thaw brought more than just mud. It brought the smell of wet earth, the rot of forgotten food buried beneath the snow, and the rising tension of a village that knew the peace wouldn't last. The sun, now peeking timidly through low-hanging clouds, offered no warmth, just enough light to remind everyone what they might lose. Matilda hadn't slept much since the attack. She couldn't. Every creak of a shutter in the wind, every bark of a dog in the distance jolted her back into readiness. Her sword remained beside her bed, her boots never far from the door. The villagers followed suit. Children no longer played in the square. Instead, they helped twist rope, fletch arrows, stack firewood. The mood had changed. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a stronghold. She met with Wulfric and Thomas every morning now. They used the old church building, one of the few structures with stone walls, to draw their plans. Wulfric had marked the enemy camp's size and location in the dirt floor using pieces of coal for boundaries and stones for tents. They're not expanding, he said one morning, which means they're consolidating, planning something. Siege, Thomas muttered. They know we're stronger than they thought. Now they'll try to starve us out. Matilda nodded. Then we give them a reason to come early. Everyone turned to look at her. We don't wait, she said. We strike again. A smaller group this time. Hit their supplies. Burn what we can. Shake them. It was bold, but after weeks of defense, it was the right move. She chose 5. Elga, deadly with a bow. Halden, quiet, clever. 2 young farmers who had shown promise in training. And Wulfric, of course. Always Wulfric. They moved before dawn. The forest was no longer a place of mystery. It was a battlefield. Every branch and shadow familiar and yet full of threat. They didn't speak much, communicating instead with hand signals. By midday, they reached the edge of the enemy camp. Smoke from a large cooking fire drifted through the pines. They smelled meat, heard laughter, so casual it was infuriating. Arrogant, Elga whispered. They think we're too scared to come back. Matilda didn't reply. She studied the supply wagons parked near the fire, unguarded, as if daring someone to take them. She gave the signal. It was over in minutes. Halden slipped in and lit the rear wagon with pitch. Elga picked off the guard, who noticed too late. The others overturned barrels, spilled grain, cut saddle straps. Chaos bloomed. Screams followed them as they ran. They didn't return straight to the village. Matilda led them in a long circle to make sure they weren't followed. Only after nightfall did they return, clothes soaked, hearts still pounding, but they were smiling. The raid worked. It didn't stop the enemy, but it slowed them. For 3 days, nothing happened. No horns, no movement on the ridge. Then came the messenger. A boy again. Different from Arlen. Maybe 12 years old. Pale, eyes wide with fear. He came alone, holding a bundle of cloth. Inside was a crude banner, black, torn, stained. They said if you don't surrender by sunset tomorrow, the boy said, they'll come. All of them. Matilda dismissed the boy with food and safe passage. Then she stood in the square and addressed her people. They want us afraid, she said, but fear is not surrender. It's preparation, and we are prepared. Cheers followed, but so did silence. Everyone understood what was coming. That night, no one slept. Barricades were reinforced again. Boiling pots were prepared at each entrance. Arrows lined every rooftop. The bell tower, long unused, had a watcher now, 2 in fact, trading off every few hours. By dawn, the village was silent, and then the horns began, not 1, not 3, 5. From 5 directions, the enemy had surrounded them, and yet no one moved. The morning after the retreat was not one of celebration, it was one of quiet reckoning. The villagers stood among splintered ladders, broken shields, and the scorched remains of siege towers, their breath rising in puffs beneath a sky turned silver by frost. Victory had come, yes, but at a price. Matilda walked the perimeter as she always did, her boots crunching over frozen mud, eyes scanning the forest edge out of habit more than necessity. The enemy had withdrawn, but she didn't trust silence. Not anymore. It had become a prelude to violence. They had lasted 62 days under siege, 62 days of rationed food, sleepless nights, patched wounds, and makeshift funerals. But the village held, not because its walls were impenetrable, but because its people refused to be broken. It wasn't stone or timber that had saved them, it was will. Now came the hardest part, rebuilding. Inside the council house, a fire burned low as leaders gathered. Thomas stood beside Matilda, a scroll of notes in his hands, inventory, casualties, repair estimates. Elga had laid out the last of the preserved meats on the table. "We can make it another 10 days if we ration," she said, her voice gravelly with fatigue. "And after that?" asked Wulfric. "Then we hunt," Matilda answered. "We rebuild the traps, push farther into the woods. There could still be scouts watching," Renwick warned. "There probably are," she agreed, "but fear can't build walls or feed children. We move forward." They agreed to send out search parties, cautious ones. Wulfric would lead the first. 3 scouts at dawn, armed, silent, and sharp-eyed. Outside, the villagers began clearing the wreckage. Children stacked broken arrows like kindling. The blacksmiths collected enemy blades for melting. The scent of smoke, sweat, and blood hung in the air, woven into the fabric of their survival. Matilda visited the infirmary, a former granary now packed with wounded. Halden sat propped against a wall, a bandage wrapped around his ribs, grinning despite the pain. "Next time," he said, "I volunteer for soup duty instead." Matilda chuckled. "Something rare these days. Only if you promise not to burn it." She moved from cot to cot, speaking to the injured, listening, thanking. They had bled for each other. That deserved more than a nod across a fire. As evening fell, the villagers gathered in the square. No feast, no song, just firelight and quiet solidarity. Matilda stood at the center and spoke. "We are still here," she said, "not because we were lucky, not because they spared us. We're here because we chose to fight for this land, for each other. That fight isn't over, but tonight, we rest. Tomorrow, we rebuild." They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They simply stood together a little straighter, a little closer. That night, Matilda didn't sleep. She stood by the well, staring at the stars, thinking of the stories elders used to tell, of heroes and monsters, of kingdoms that rose and fell. She used to believe those were just tales to keep children entertained. Now she knew better. They were warnings. At dawn, the scouts departed, 3 figures vanishing into the tree line like ghosts. Matilda watched them go, heart tight in her chest. She hated sending people out. But waiting for the world to come to her hadn't worked out so well either. By midday, they returned, not with blood, not with wounds, but with news. "There's a camp," Wulfric said, "abandoned, South Ridge." But it was theirs. Matilda frowned. How long ago? A week, maybe less. They had moved quickly, too quickly, almost like they had somewhere more important to be. She ordered a full scouting party to investigate, this time with more hands and provisions. What they found chilled her to the bone. The camp wasn't just temporary, it had been a command post. Maps drawn on deerskin, lists in a language half familiar, symbols that didn't belong to any known village. This wasn't a rogue warband. This had been something else entirely. Coordinated, financed, strategic. Among the wreckage was a sealed pouch, inside waxed paper, a sigil stamped in black ink. Matilda didn't recognize it, but Thomas did. Thomas did. "From the northern cities," he whispered. "Their merchant guards use it. Not soldiers, spies." It didn't make sense. Why would merchants fund a siege against a tiny mountain village? Unless this wasn't about territory. Unless it was about something buried beneath the frost and soil. Something the villagers didn't even know they were protecting. Matilda stared at the symbol, her fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "Get me everything you can on this," she said. "Old records, trade routes, legends. I want to know why we were really attacked." Because something told her this wasn't over, it was just beginning. The morning after the discovery of the sigil was eerily quiet. The village, though battered, stood resilient. Matilda held the parchment with the unfamiliar symbol, its ink smudged but still legible. Thomas stood beside her, his brow furrowed in contemplation. "This isn't just a random mark," he said, his voice low. "It's deliberate, a message." Matilda nodded, her mind racing. "We need to understand what it means. It's the key to why they attacked us." They convened a council meeting in the main hall. The elders, warriors, and scholars gathered, the atmosphere tense. The parchment was placed on the central table, and all eyes turned to it. Elga, the village's historian, leaned in to examine the symbol. "I've seen something similar in the old texts," she murmured. "It's associated with a secretive order from the northern cities. They were known for their clandestine operations and had a reputation for manipulating events from the shadows." A murmur spread through the room. The implications were unsettling. Matilda stood, her gaze sweeping over the assembly. "If this order is behind the attacks, we need to uncover their motives. We must send envoys to the northern cities, gather intelligence, and prepare for whatever comes next." Volunteers stepped forward, ready to undertake the perilous journey. Among them was Wulfric, his resolve unwavering. "I'll go," he said. "We need answers." As the envoys prepared for their mission, the village fortified its defenses. Walls were reinforced, watchtowers erected, and patrols increased. The villagers trained diligently, their determination fueled by the recent events. Days turned into weeks, and the envoys returned with troubling news. The order, known as the Obsidian Circle, had been orchestrating conflicts across the region, aiming to destabilize territories and seize control. Their reach was vast, their influence insidious. Matilda absorbed the information, her jaw set. "We can't face them alone, we need allies." She dispatched messengers to neighboring villages and cities, seeking to form a coalition against the Obsidian Circle. Responses trickled in, some offering support, others hesitant. Meanwhile, the village became a hub of activity. Supplies were stockpiled, strategies devised, and alliances forged. The villagers, once isolated, now stood as part of a growing resistance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a scout arrived with urgent news. A force bearing the Obsidian Circle's emblem was advancing toward the village. The time for preparation was over. The battle was imminent. Matilda addressed the villagers, her voice steady. "We've faced adversity before and emerged stronger. This time will be no different. We stand together and we fight for our future." As the enemy approached, the village braced itself. The defenders took their positions, weapons at the ready, hearts resolute. The clash was inevitable, but so was their determination to protect their home. Before we dim the lights and let the silence tuck you in, we'd love to hear from you. What part of tonight's story struck you the most? Was it Matilda's unwavering courage, the eerie silence after battle, or the chilling sigil that promises even darker truths ahead? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Whether you're watching from a cozy apartment in New York, a quiet village in the Alps, or a beachside hut somewhere the sun never sets, we want to know, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. One click and you'll be the first to hear the next chapter in this epic tale of resilience and secrets when it drops tomorrow night. Turn on the bell so you never miss the moment darkness whispers again. Thank you for staying with us through the frost and fire. Sleep well, dream bold, and remember, every legend begins in the quiet moments before dawn. We'll see you in the next story. Good night.